Clerk, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Bill. Can we have an approval of the minutes of November 17th?
I move we accept the minutes as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed, none, thank you. At this time, if anybody has any new public business that's not on the agenda, feel free to stand. Okay, hearing none, thank you. We'll have a public hearing under Chapter 138 of the General Laws on the application of Texas Roadhouse Holdings LLC, DBA Texas Roadhouse, 301 Newberry Street, John C. Marasco, manager for a change of officers, directors, LLC managers at the corporate level. Is there somebody here to speak to that? And he's already there.
Good evening.
Please keep the mask on. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Andrew Upton for the licensee.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. We are requesting approval of 2 new officers for the parent company of Texas Roadhouse. These gentlemen will reside at the headquarters in Louisville, Kentucky. This is a filing mandated by the ABCC, and there'll be no change to any aspect of the operation of the restaurant here in Danvers or any of the Massachusetts Texas Roadhouse restaurants.
Clerk, is all the paperwork in order?
Yes.
Thank you. Questions, Bill?
No questions. It's just another example of the state taking away any of our authority on this issue.
Maureen?
No questions?
Gardner?
No, I have no questions.
This is a public hearing. Does anyone in the public have any questions?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you. It's the will of the board.
I move we accept the application as presented.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. All in favor? I didn't hear.
Yep.
Speak up, folks.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. It passes. Thank you for coming out tonight.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome. The board is requested to renew liquor licenses for the calendar year 2021 as per the attached. Mr. Town Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You did receive a copy of the licenses that are subject to renewal at this time, and you'll note on this document that the adjustments to the fees that were made by the board at the last meeting are reflected here. And through you, I believe paperwork is in order for these.
It is correct.
So, need a
Thank you.
vote of
Questions,
approval.
Gardner?
I have no questions, thank you.
Maureen?
No questions?
Bill?
No questions, thank you.
If I may, we've transferred a couple licenses this year already, recently, to new entities. Yet the name doesn't change, such as Osborne Tavern.
I can speak to that.
Please.
The board approved that. The ABCC is still working through that application.
Okay. The same with Calitri's?
The Calitri's one, the ABCC did approve that one, as indicated, transfer approved by ABCC on 11/6.
Okay.
The Chili's one is also in process.
So one approved and 2 in process?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
What's the will of the board?
I move we accept the licenses renewals as presented.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? None. Thank you very much. We'll move on to number 5. The board will conduct the annual tax classification hearing. Mr. Town Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're joined tonight by Steve Poulos, our Chief Assessor, Rodney Conley, our Director of Administration and Finance, and in the audience, Bruce Sims, who serves on the Board of Assessors with Mr. Poulos. You received a memorandum from Mr. Poulos with your packets last week that should look quite familiar from years past, subject to the numbers, of course, being updated to reflect our most recent valuation. And Mr. Poulos has put together a presentation for you tonight. It's a little, this is a little different from years past. Based on feedback from the board last year, we've put together a bit of an intro to provide an overview of what this process is before we get into the actual data from the most recent year that is subject to the action before the board this evening. So with that, I would turn it over to Mr. Poulos.
Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. All right, so as the town manager mentioned, the first half of the presentation will be more of, really just an operational overview of how the assessing office works and how we arrive at the values and some differences, some questions that have come up over the past year. So, first thing, what is an assessment? Really just simply assessment is an opinion of value that's placed on your property. It's fair and full cash value as of a certain date based on a certain data set. And that value is used as a basis to calculate your taxes that you pay in any given fiscal year. How does my assessed value affect my tax rate and taxes? Well, so there's really two pieces of the puzzle. You got your fair and full cash value, that's your assessment, and then you have the budgetary decisions that are made by the town, so the spending. And those, if you combine all the assessments in the town and you look at the total spending, it's just simple division on how the tax rate is calculated. So you can see how, if the assessment goes up or down disproportionately to the percent change of the spending, the tax rate is going to reflect that. So what we try to do is kind of illustrate that point. And the common misconception is, a lot of folks will think that if your assessment goes up, you're automatically going to pay more in taxes, and that's not necessarily the case. So in these slides here, really the two pieces that you want to pay attention to are down here. These three pieces of information there, and then this pie chart here. So in the first example, you can see we have 4 parcels, and based on their value, they own a piece of the tax burden or the budgetary need of $100. So you can see that their percentage interest in this town is based on their total valuation as a percentage of the total value of the island. So we have the town budget of $100. If you add up all the property value, it's $2,000. So that equals the tax rate of $50 per 100. So this same scenario on this page, it's basically, we're on an island, there's no access. Now there's a bridge to the island, so all the properties are worth twice as much. It's still the same $100 that need to be raised, but now the total property value is $4,000. You can see the total amount raised is always going to be the $100, and it's reflected. The value change is now reflected in the rate. The rate is cut in half at $25. You see that everybody still pays the same amount of taxes at the end of the year, even though their value is twice what it was in the prior example. And then this one is just to show a shift within the class based on what your neighbor is doing to his or her home. So we have parcel A, that's the blue one, demolishes a mobile home or a seasonal home and replaces it with a high-end year-round dwelling. So their value went up significantly, and therefore it changes the total value of the town. It also changes their share of the tax burden. So the town's still spending $100. Now the total town's worth $2,500 because of the new growth that the parcel A put into it, and then the tax rate reflects that increase in value at $40. And you look at the far right-hand column, you can see the shift inside the class. So now A is paying more, and actually the rest of the residents of the town are paying
a little bit less than what was reflected in the prior two examples. So now you take that same concept that we were just talking about and apply it to a town like Danvers. So we have 11,000 pieces to that pie and a budget of around $80 million. But really, the math is still the same. It's just more moving parts. So our tax-supported portion of the budget's about $83 million. We divide that by the total value of taxable value of Danvers, which is about $5.5 billion, and you're going to come out with a uniform tax rate of $15.20 per 100,000. So now another question that we get a lot is why are assessments sometimes different than appraisals? Well, they're both opinions of value. The mass appraisal is the standard of practice that we use, and that's defined as a systemic appraisal of groups of properties as of a given date using standardized procedures and statistical testing. So we're using a large data set based on an entire year, or in some cases 2 years of sales, and we're extrapolating values based on those sales and building a valuation model that's going to apply those values globally to the entire town. An appraisal is looking to value one single property based on a few comparisons. So it's got a narrow range of data, a narrow geographical relation to the property, and generally it's a limited time frame. You're looking for sales that happen, as close to, a few months as you can. A couple reasons why we don't use this. Probably the biggest one is single property appraisals just aren't financially feasible for tax assessment purposes, nor would there really be enough time in the year to have a fee appraisal done on 10,000 parcels every year. So this is just an example of a fee appraisal. I won't spend much time on this, but you can see it's basically, this is the subject property here, and this is all its attributes here. And then you have 1, 2, 3 comparisons. So what they're doing is they're looking at it and they're backing the sales into the subject. So the selling price is reflective of what the subject is. And with mass appraisal, you're essentially doing the reverse. We're taking the values indicated by this and extrapolating it onto the town. Or here, you're backing into it. And you can see here that the indicated value is about $155,000. And the property actually sold for $170,000. So value doesn't always equal sales price. Mass appraisal. Other questions we get is the differences between commercial and residential valuation. They're both held to the same statistical standards. And mass appraisal valuation modeling, probably the key difference is that commercial is valued on an income approach and reconciled with a market-adjusted cost approach, where the residential is just market-adjusted cost approach. But in the end, income and market-adjusted cost approach are going to equal each other because they're both avenues to get to the fair and full cash value as of a given date. Some data. This is just some data that we collect. So if you were to pull your permit, if you were to pull your record card, would have all the assessment history going back, 5 or 6 years, all your sales information, deeds, legal references. You got your land area, current owner, prior owner. And then, so if you're looking here down at the land area, what you'll notice is in Danvers specifically is the prime lot is the first. So if you're in residential 1, 10,000 square foot zone, your prime lot's where all your value is. So first 10,000 square feet are gonna be where all the value is. The excess or residual square feet are considered excess acreage. All the value is in the ability to build on that parcel. If you have two parcels, one 15,000 square feet, one 10,000 square feet, and R1, that 15,000 square foot, assuming they're vacant and the same in every way other than their size, the 15,000 square foot lot is not going to be worth 1.5 times what that 10,000 square foot lot is, because you can only put one home on both lots. One just has a little bit bigger backyard. As far as the building characteristics, we looking at the frame style, foundation, roof structure, cover. We got, how many baths you have, how many bedrooms you have, conditions that it's in, grades of construction, any special yard items such as freestanding garage or shed or anything of that. Plus, we sketch every building in town. We maintain a detailed sketch to calculate the square footage. All square footage is based on external measurements, and it's consistently applied throughout the town. The grading is where we pick up, like I said, we're on a market-adjusted cost approach. So you're looking at cost to build, replacement cost, new, minus depreciation. So we need to look at a building, particularly the ones when they're newly built, and you're going to apply a grade to it, because that determines what, a more expensive house costs more to build. So we're looking at architectural complexity, the different materials used, workmanship, things like that. And size doesn't necessarily matter, although the larger ones you do see more complex architecture and higher end finishings. It doesn't mean that you can't build a smaller home that meets those same things. You can see with C, it's just doesn't vary much outside of your typical box. And then B, the architecture is getting a little bit more complex, window trimmings. And then A, you have the large windows, the brick stucco finish, the overhangs, much more complex. And then obviously no pictures of the inside, but the insides tend to follow suit. The other piece is the depreciation and condition. So when we look at a home, we also, not only are we looking at the grading, we're looking at the condition of the home. How much wear has it had? A new home will have no depreciation because it's brand new. But if you look at a home that's 20 years old and nothing's been done to it, there might be some deterioration, deferred maintenance, and you might be looking to downgrade the condition. So here's my attempt to explain depreciation. So we get a lot of questions of what does very good mean, good, and how do you approach it? So the first point I want to make is this example here is a colonial. It's grade, so that's cost of construction. That's how high end the home is, when it was built. And then here's the depreciation. So it's brand new, 2019. It's got 1 year depreciation built into it. So it's average condition for a brand new house. So you can see here in the average column, age 0 to 1, you got 1 year depreciation. But now you look at a home like this. This is the Cape that underwent a renovation. Let's say it was average in this picture. So you take how much it cost to build when it was new, and you subtract 32% of depreciation in that Cape, because all they did was they just maintained, with no deferred maintenance, but they did what they had to, but there was no updates to the modern building codes. And then they went all out and remodeled it. This probably would go to very good. So this, now it's got 11 years worth of depreciation. So if you look over here, an average, you go down to 11, it's basically the condition of a 16-year-old house. Because all these finishings are new, but it still has the older framing and things like that that you just can't change. The lower ceiling heights, basement, lower basement. And then this is the 30-month assessing cycle. So when we start to talk about sales, you have to realize that the sales we use they're not current. Sometimes they're probably 18 months, 24 months old by the time you're seeing your value. So this is where we are right now. We're at the classification here. All right, so the fiscal year started back here on July 1st. So we're already almost 6 months into the fiscal year. We're just setting the values now. This is where we collect our new growth to. And this is way back here is where the 2019 calendar year sales is where we're getting our data from. So you can see how far removed you are from sales that took place in January in 2019. But this is a fixed period in time, and it changes every year. It's the last full calendar year sale, last full calendar year prior to the start of the fiscal year. And then we'll set the values here, and this is when you can file for an abatement. Now getting into the mass appraisals, mass appraisal analysis. So it's going to be a few key terms that I'll be talking about. Assessment to sales ratio, so that's just the assessment divided by the sales price. The median ASR, so that's the midpoint of the assessment to sale ratio. The coefficient of dispersion is basically a measure of what the average variation around the mean is. So how tight or how uniform your data is, how tight it is around the mean, or how scattered it is. Then level of assessment is the median assessment of all sales data combined. So here is just a visual illustration. It's not the Shears analysis, but so here's when we talk about level of assessment. So here's before we go through and do any model adjustments. This yellow line represents a level of assessment of, say 93%. So we want to be at 100% of market value, and the data is clearly scattered all over the place and not uniform enough to make any informed decisions, any informed valuations decisions. So what we want to do is we start with the extreme outliers and we work our way in. These are generally sales that have outside influences, or properties that don't reflect the current assessment, such as a home that was bought to be torn down. So the assessments are reflecting a hole in the ground, but it was a home when it was sold. So these are all sales that were removed. And then after that, you have the stuff that's a lot tighter, and you have the small micro adjustments of building types, neighborhoods, and lands. And then at the end, you have a nice uniform, tightly knit group around the mean with the median level assessment of the whole town at 1, or fair and full cash value. And there's a lot of talk around 2 or 3 families last year and the large increase. So I added this slide in here to show that these are the Department of Revenue model requirements. When we set them at our model, these are the types of things they're looking at. When we talk about the median ASR, that's really the level of assessment. They want that, and that needs to be between 90 and 110%. The single family makes up our master class. So none of these building types can, if we set our median level at 95%, none of these other land use types can vary more than 5% from that. And additionally, you got sales quartile pricing, where you break up the data in sales prices by quartiles, and none of those, the 4 pricing quartiles, can fall outside of 5% plus or minus of the master class. So you can't be, if you're at 95% of an assessment to sales ratio, median level of assessment, your quartiles can't be, none of your quartiles can fall be outside of the 90 or 100%, to make sure that not only all the land types and uses are assessed the same, but also land prices. So you have your homes that are selling for $350,000 are assessed at the same level as homes that are selling for $1.1 million, and the same goes for everything in between. This is just a quick example to show, kind of what I'm looking at when I'm doing the model adjustments. You can see just that we talked about, you got your median level of assessment, that's the median ASR, you got your average, standard deviation, coefficient of dispersion. So these are all measures of, we don't really look at it as a chart, but those are all measures of dispersion around the median. And we're looking to have a COD of below 10, so right away you're gonna start working on your outliers, calling brokers, calling legal representations. A lot of them are estate sales, finding out what happened, and then either removing them or adjusting them accordingly. And then once you're done with that, then you can start your model adjustments. You gotta make sure the data is clean. And then the other thing is, we're looking for things like inequities where we want, like I said, everybody's gotta be median level within 5% of the master class. So you've got, right here, here's an example of an inequity. You've got 2 building types, You know, they're not even the same use. You got one that's, it could be a single family, you got another one would be a 102 condo, and, you know, you got a median level of assessment of 93 and almost 96. So right there, they're assessed a little bit differently. I'd be looking to, would be looking to bump up the condo townhouses to bring it in line with the bungalows. So this is kind of a recap, a lot of information, kind of went through it quickly, but so appraisal is a valuation of a single property using a small amount of data over a short period of time. Assessments are a statistical approach to valuing an entire town with a large data set. They both offer a value, and value does not always equal sales price. And, you know, I always say to anyone that comes in, we're striving for accuracy. We want to get it right. We encourage taxpayer involvement, and nobody knows your home better or neighborhood better than you do. So if you think something's off, you know, definitely come talk to us. I think I'll pause there for a minute for any questions.
Thank you, Steve, for that presentation. Start with the board for questions. Bill?
Just got a question. I'm very impressed with this presentation. I've been around doing this a lot, but a lot of stuff I didn't know before. You say that when you do the assessment, take a retail price of a residential property. How do you compare the value of a commercial property to a residential property? I was always told that the commercial property is based on income, and the residential is based on a sale price.
Yeah. Well, you don't. Yeah.
So there's no correlation between the two, essentially.
You don't compare them at all, really, unless you have you know, I'll preface that with saying, unless you have a single-family home in a commercial, industrial zoned area. Commercial, industrial zoned land pricing will influence the total sale on that home, but generally, you won't. Generally, you won't compare the two. And when I say income approach, so the buyers traditionally of commercial properties are investors, so they're looking for cash flow. It's an investment. So they're going to be looking at what kind of income can that property generate and how much risk are they willing to assume by buying it. And, you know, within that, they develop a sales price. In theory, you're not going to buy anything that you can't build and replace yourself. So that's where a depreciated cost approach comes in, where, you know, if you were to, essentially they're gonna equal the same. They can equal the same thing. But
So what's the impact of, like, for example, High Street? We've rezoned that property from residential, or it's now a combination of residential and commercial, and there's still a few residential houses left in that area. And you see people who are trying to cobble those parcels together to make a bigger parcel, I would assume, for commercial development of some sort. How does that change of zoning affect the value of that property? Since you can go from just having a multiple family residence to having a property that would have commercial and multiple family residences.
right, well, there's a couple things there. Where it's so new, we really don't have the data to support it. But if the values were to increase, and even though the single-family home is there, that land value, the fact that that building is built on land that has an allowable use of whatever is in the new zoning is going to be attracting to a commercial buyer that wants to buy it and demo it and build. So the land value on that property would be increased. But, you know, it could show that the sales are showing that it was worth more as a single family. I don't have that data right now to talk specifically about what it's going to happen, but it could bring it up or it could bring it down.
Could that value increase before the commercial development was made? In other words, would someone be assessed, pay more money if they bought that property with the anticipation of developing it now that it's commercial
Well, yeah,
versus
it's the
residential?
same thing if you look at it like on a lakefront home. People are going to pay more for the lakefront home than they are in the home across the street because the lakefront home is more desirable. So now, if that home becomes more desirable in a marketplace based on its location, then it's just going to be worth a little bit more.
We don't have any lakefront homes in Danvers, but we do have riverfront homes, and I assume that same assessment would correlate with that.
Yep. That's exactly right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Maureen?
Nice to meet you, Steve.
Nice to meet you, too.
Thank you. No, that was great. No questions.
Gardner?
So, one of the questions that will happen is, tonight we'll settle on a classification, the local media will print it. People want to know what the value of their assessed value of their home is. Excuse me. How current is Patriot to listing my assessment?
Patriot's updated once a year. It's a static database, and we will update it between now and before the third quarter bills are sent, because it's always reflective on the certified value. So we're still, essentially, we're still in the certification process. So until we get through classification hearing and our tax rate is set, at that point, we can publish the values. But
So-
anyone can call and, get the information from the office. And actually, we have a current listing on our website as well.
What do you mean you have a current list? Because I'm looking at the Patriot system right now,
Yeah.
and I see a value for my home. Are you saying that will change after
Yes,
classification?
yes. Yeah.
And how is the average person going to kind of know that this, if they took even if they took the rate, the new rate
Yep.
that we'll set?
Yep.
Right now it's 1306, whatever we come up with. They're gonna apply that to the rate that the total value they see here,
Right.
and it's actually not gonna be reflective of the bill they get.
Right,
For
I
two
mean,
reasons. One is you're catching up with the delta, and you're doing the third quarter, which means the first two quarters have to come up.
Right.
You have to make up the difference. How can they calculate what their tax bill is going to be if they don't, do they have to call to ask what the value is gonna be, their
Well, I mean,
certified value is gonna be?
Well, I guess the reason why we don't is because it could change, right?
Okay.
So as we're going through the certification process and the state's reviewing our model, this is all kind of one big process.
Yep,
And there's a possibility that your value could change a little bit. They could say, you know what, the pricing quartiles, your bottom quartile is too low. So, we're gonna have to go back, and that could change dozens of things to change pricing quartiles. Because you have, the lower price homes across different neighborhoods. And so you're gonna be changing the land values in those neighborhoods, you're gonna be changing building types. And because of that, the value can change. So without a certified value, we don't really have anything to post. It's still in a state of flux. And on the Patriot website, when you go on, it says, FY '20 values, and then it gives you the tax rate that those were based off of.
right.
So, unfortunately, there's no,
But I guess the likelihood of it changing
yeah,
from the number I see now is 100%. It's going to change.
Yes.
Because 100%. But I gotta think there's a smaller percentage opportunity during the classification, process. I would rather see a projected number subject to change than a number I know is a year old.
we can do that. We can
I just
start-
think it brings it closer, because my number is my number, and I perceive, because I saw in your documentation that the average household went up so many thousands of dollars. Even if mine's average, it's gonna go up by that much, and, mine usually falls a little bit below average, but it's gonna go up that much, and so I know that this number is at least $5,000 off of the current projection Patriot has that may or may not get tweaked. I would have a closer understanding, and it's all managing expectations, I'd have a closer understanding of the new rate and the current estimated 2021 value that may be subject to change.
So how
May or may
early are you thinking? How early would you like to see the projection?
I think what's gonna happen is, we're gonna make a decision tonight, it's gonna get reported by the media, and people are gonna start going online that next day.
Yeah.
It hits a local social website and says, hey, this article was in the paper, the new rate is X, your average tax bill will go up Y. And people are gonna say, well, as they always do and should, what about me?
Right.
They're gonna go on Patriot, and the number they're gonna see is known to be a year old, and far delta from what they may achieve what you already know is a preliminary number.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'll make sure
So
it's
I'm wondering
updated
if- yeah, I'm
by
wondering if-
Friday or Monday.
Yeah, can we get, and I don't mind that we'd have all sorts of dunning messages and asterisks
Yeah.
that says.
Well, no,
this
once
your
tonight is
projected
over, it's not
21.
gonna change. We always update it within a week or so
Yeah.
of the classification hearing, but I thought you wanted something published back, like in the summertime, when the
No,
fiscal year
I'd like it,
starts.
I'd like it so
No, I-
before we make this decision, or as we make this decision, the preliminary number's up there, subject to change,
Yep.
modifications, but it's less likelihood, I'm gonna get a better picture of what my next year's tax bill is gonna be. Then I know that 100% of the ones that are on here now are wrong.
Right.
It's a thought, it's a suggestion.
Yeah,
you know.
no, so, well, what I can do is tomorrow morning, as soon as I get in, I'll create a new, fresh valuation list. I'll upload that to the website.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of at Patriot's mercy on how fast they get, because we don't have access. That's a
Yeah.
cloud-based software. They go in, we send them an email with the request, and you go in a ticket number. But I'll,
But in the future, maybe we just do it
Yeah,
the
I'll
end
get
of
that.
November, because we know we're gonna do the classification at the beginning of December,
yeah,
and have it prepared in the future, just a thought. I'd rather be, $100 off in my estimate than 6,000, I'm going to be $6,000 off because if I'm an average home.
right. Yep, that's fair.
Okay. And then I have no other questions, so we start talking about the actual numbers.
Okay, great, thank you. David, any questions for
Nothing,
Steve?
thank you, Dan.
No, thank you. Well, at this time, anyone in the audience with any particular questions for the assessor? Andrea Daly, you'd like to go to the microphone and address your questions to the chair, please.
I don't want yours to fall on the floor. Andrea Daly, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3.
Welcome.
Thank you. I dropped off to all present here. That would be concerning the tax rate, what we're going to set, what we're going to spend. I gave all of you a packet of information, and I'm hoping that some of you have that information with you. I'm taking an opposite approach. I'm looking at, in 2020, all of which the assessor presented here as to how they arrive at a tax bill for the residents of the town. And I'm concentrating on 2- and 3-family homes. And I'm going to be talking about the end result of the studies that the assessing department conducts in order for us to have a tax bill. In this case, it will be 2021. And my study was on the 2- and 3-family properties in the town of Danvers for the year 2020. And these studies were prompted by a tax bill to our property, and the valuation, the total assessed valuation, went up 31.97%. And I was informed, and I had talks with the assessor. I was informed by the assessor's department that all 2-family properties in town increased by 20%, give or take. And that the townhouse-style properties that are 2-family had a larger increase in the total valuation. So I was figuring, okay, 20%, give or take. But my studies show that the stated increase of 20% varied beyond, way beyond the 20%, and is not consistent with the 2-family properties presented. Conversely, the 3-family homes presented were not affected by that 20% increase. As a matter of fact, the three-family properties presented in the study are much lower in total assessed valuation for the tax year 2020, and consequently, they pay a lower tax bill to the town. And I'm here to try to understand why this situation exists for this tax year 2020, and I believe that the total assessed valuation placed on the current two-family properties will be the baseline for their new total assessed valuation for the tax year 2021, resulting in further inequities, which would result in a higher tax bill on two-family properties in 2021. And so my question to the chair for the assessing department is, there are a few questions here. Who places the total assessed valuation on residential properties in Danvers? We have two terms here, the assessors department and Patriot Properties, but who is the person that actually puts the figure on the property?
Unfortunately, Steve, you don't have a microphone? I'd like you to answer them individually, if you could just stand and
Steve, why don't you come in?
quickly, yep, maybe you can use, thank you.
Thank you. It's kind of hard when you have mics and things like that.
Just if you could answer the direct question, Steve.
Who places total valuations of residential properties in Danvers? It would be a combination of Board of Assessors and Patriot Properties.
All right, so Patriot Properties, in my conversations with the assessors,
Specific questions to me, and then Steve will.
I'm sorry. My question is, in my conversation with the assessors department, that it was indicated to me that the figures are generated by the assessors department, assessing department, and then those figures are given to the Patriot Properties to publish.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's the assessment's values.
Thank you. And my research on page 6 of the packet that I sent to each one of you, my research on random two-family properties, the 2020 total assessed valuation showed increases beyond the stated 20%. As a matter of fact, there were 68 properties that I analyzed. 38 of those properties were assessed way over the 20%, give or take. And I'm wondering why that happened.
It's on and off.
Is there an answer for that, Steve?
Which are we on, 3 or 2?
We're on it was page 6 of the package. This is the second question. And it's the
Oh, I
valuation.
answered 2 and 3 together. I think you're reading off 3.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So, well, if you read the email,
I'm sorry.
if you read the initial email that you were quoted, we were talking about total average.
Okay, I'm
we
sorry.
call it
Right.
Average valuation changes.
There was,
So, obviously, within an average, 20% was the average change, so there's gonna be a range above and below that, as well as outliers, so I think that's kind of what pointing to here. And again, Mr. Chair, I've spent several hours with Staley and her husband in the office, and we've gone over, all this information over several times. These pretty much these exact questions. And then, so what was my research, page 6 on random two families?
well,
So, yeah, again, it's the 20% was stated as the average change.
Thank you.
thank you. My studies indicated that the 20% was a basis, and of the 38 properties, of the 68 properties that I analyzed, 38 of those properties were assessed at over the 20%. Of those 38 properties that were presented, 27% of those properties were assessed at 23% or above. So that is a big difference. when we're talking about hundreds of thousands of
That
dollars
is a
here.
big difference, and Andrew, my years of trying to analyze property values, not just in Danvers, but in other communities, and try to find a number that makes sense when you look at too broad a sampling, which the assessor does, it's hard to come down to a specific price, and that's why as an appraisal number, it's limited properties are very similar, and it makes it much easier to find that value. But the assessor's got to look at everything, and it's very difficult to narrow in on a value on a particular property because everything is, there's so many different factors. And whatever your conversation with the assessor was, I'm sure he tried to point that out to you, but it's difficult, and I think Steve would agree, to look at a property and say, why is that up 20%, 30%, or down 20%? And it's always all over the board, as his shot, ski, where he showed all those dots all over the place, trying to get them to narrow in is a difficult process.
I agree.
Yep.
I'm just looking at the end result for a specific grouping and not the whole town. I didn't do an analytical study of single-family homes. Mine was more concentrated on a random selection of 2- and 3-family homes, which, again, it's a focus. It's a focus. And
No,
for
your work is very extensive, and I appreciate the work that you did.
it took months.
I'm sure it did.
Those figures are accurate. I checked them 3 times. And in due respect to the assessor, this isn't a bad feeling. I'm just pointing out the result of when you get specifically focused, it brings out a complex problem sharper.
It does.
And the question here is, were the 3-family homes or dwellings, properties, the total assessed value? Because the total assessed value is for the building itself, the field items, which would be garages, swimming pools, things like that, and the land. And waterfront property, of course, is in a whole different other category, as it was brought out by Selectman Bill Clark. But in this case here, were the 3-family properties also included, through you, Mr. Chairman, were the 3-family properties also included in this 20% increase?
Steve?
Somewhere. As we discussed in our meeting, it's really a function of building type, and we've since changed that with our data quality study, but there were properties that, same building types that span both use codes. So there
Steve,
were,
would you explain same building type between 2-family, 3-families?
Yeah, so, when you're looking at a building, you might have multi-conversion, you might have a strictly multi. So multi-conversion would be like a house that was originally built as a single family 100 years ago and since been converted to a full multi-use. You have garden style, you have townhouse style, we have 3 families. We've converted essentially 4 of those building types to 2 building types. Multi-conventional, which is now all 2-family, and 3-family, which is all 3-family. But prior to that, they spanned both classes. Just some of the building types, specifically multi-conversions, were more largely concentrated in the 2-family use code because of the code restrictions on converting to a 3-family. It's more costly and it's more difficult. So you see a lot of single families that were converted to 2 families, and not so much a single family converted to a 3-family. Although it does happen. There's several of them.
That's not really answering my specific question. I was looking because they're segregated, the 2 families and the 3 families, and the 2-family properties, in all honesty, have become a cash cow.
Well, what you're looking at is you're looking at the result. When you're looking at an average increase, total increase in the class, you're looking at the result of several changes in the various building types. They're located in neighborhoods all across town that have different pricing schedules. So So you have, just because of that, they're not all going to change at the same rate, depending on the location, style, age.
I believe that, I haven't finished on this sheet, and then I can get into more specifics.
Yes,
The gentleman speaking to a mic, I'm older and getting a hard time hearing him.
thank you, Bill.
Sorry.
There is another question that I'd like to address through you, please.
Certainly.
What role does the prior residential property sales play in the current assessed valuation on residential 2- and 3-family properties?
Steve?
Well, there's, currently, Danvers has obviously restrictions on where you can place two and 3-family homes, but if there's an existing 2 or 3-family in a zoned area that is only allowable use is a single family, then the sales surrounding that home would have an impact on the land value only and not the building type, which would build in the value attributed to the multiple units allowed within that structure.
That really doesn't answer the question, but I'll accept a general statement because the assessor is going to give us generalities, and Mrs. Daly did on specifics. And there's a vast difference here, because when you're trying to assess all the buildings in town, I wouldn't want his job. It's tremendous. I'm looking at the specific results of what is going on. And in a little bit, I'll give you an idea. Nothing snaps the garter on a leg but what you pay in taxes. Ultimately, what you pay in taxes. And there was an article in the paper about Beverly and single-family homes going up approximately $218 in tax. It'll be extra tax for the average person. And in the year 2019, I had asked, and the assessor's office has been very generous in giving me the information I need, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
In 2019, there were 12 properties in town sold, because I asked for a sheet that would have the properties that were sold in the town of Danvers in the year 2018.
What class?
The class, it was for 2-family homes.
2-family, thank you.
2-family homes. And they, and also I separated them for 2-family homes and 3-family homes. And in 2019, there in the whole town for the year, there were 12 properties sold, all 2 families. 7 of those properties were sold for less than their assessed value. Now, one would think it would be more than their assessed value, but you have that sheet, which is labeled number 3. So of the 12 properties sold, 7 were sold for less than their assessed value. There were 5 that were sold for more than their assessed value. And the values that they sold for on these properties were $41,000 less, $2,800 less, $52 less. These are all on 2-family homes. And that would equate that they sold for 7.41% less, 4.83% less. So you would think that would reflect in how they were going to assess these 2 families. There was only one property that sold for $119,200 more than its assessed value. And that, I figured that was probably where the 20% came from, because it sold for 19.87% more. And so I thought to myself, maybe that's where they got the 20% for all the other homes in the town for the year 2020. By the same token, the three-family homes in Danvers that sold, there were only 4 three-family properties sold in the town, and they sold for more than their assessed value, and yet their tax bill did not go up because they weren't assessed any rate like 20% more, give or take. In 2019, there was only 1 three-family home sold, and that sold for $201,400 more, or 42.9%. So if you had, and it was the sales price and the assessed value on that three-family home was $468,600. $468,000. Anybody, when they're talking about fair cash value of assessed value, there'd be a line from this building to Danvers Square if everybody wanted to buy that house, a three-family home in good condition, for $468,000, because I'd be the first one in line. So we have a difference here of what goes on, the direct result for people with 2- and 3-family homes and tax money paid to the town. In the year 2020, the person who got their tax bill paid more in taxes. I'll give you some figures here. $2,432.
I'd like you to just limit it to specific questions.
Yes. Well, the specific questions here is that if one looks at the package that I gave you for package 7 and compared it to package 12, how much money more was paid to the town from the 2-family versus the 3-family? In the 3-family, you've got 3 different rentals coming in. The 2 families are usually owned by the owner with a rental unit. In the case of the 3-family homes, they're not. The owner doesn't live in that 3-family. They're a business. It's a business for them, the 3 families. But the difference is stark. One paying in like $82 more, $44 more per year, and the other building, the 2 families paying $1,044 more, $1,600 more. So my question is, do the assessors look at the narrowed picture here as well as the big picture? Because there is a big discrepancy about what people are paying in actual taxes. And I want to know, is this taken into account when the assessed value goes on the 2-family properties? That's my question.
Steve, can you answer that question?
Mr. Chairman, can I respond generally to that?
Yes.
I want to start, I think Mr. Poulos and Ms. Daly want the same thing, which is the most accurate valuations we can apply. If the process were as flawed as some of I haven't looked at the analysis, but the state would reject our request for certification if the values were as flawed as is being suggested. And I think, too, Mr. Poulos is about to walk through the actual valuations for the year that you're speaking to. That's the second half of the presentation. So he hasn't presented yet the analysis that we're talking about. But I do think just the point, looking at the 11,000 parcels, it's the global picture, it's the narrow picture, but at the end of the day, most of what this office does is spelled out in statute. It is reviewed by the state, and if the analysis were flawed, they would send it back to us and say, try again. And I think and again, I can't speak to the specific examples in the packet, but that's the general statement that I would make with respect to the analysis.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I might, part of my profession is statistical analysis of complex data models for healthcare. And in my education, in my profession, trying to extrapolate with some of the presumptions that are being suggested on a small data set as it's applied to a large data set is inaccurate. The presumption that a three-family is a business and not owner-occupied compared to a two-family, and that's just a presumption, that's a suggestion. If you apply those presumptions and assumptions to the data models, you can get all sorts of figures, and you can get all sorts of numbers. The average is the average of the whole. It's not the average of a subset, even no matter when you select it. Unless you do 100% of the data set, you're not going to get the average. If you pick 20% of it, you're going to be higher or lower. So some things, and we also know by presentation that sales values lag behind the assessed values. So it's a false corollary to apply purchase and sales in a year and suggest that they should be somehow equating to the assessed value that's on the picture here. It's a very complex model, and it's a very detailed science. And so I looked at the numbers, I have them before me, and you can't take small subsets and expect that subset to accurately reflect the large 100% data model in values. It doesn't apply. It can't apply. Mathematically, it won't. So I think you either look at the whole and ask why your one situation is different, so widely different than the whole, in which case you look at the house and say, oh, it was recently remodeled before it was sold. They put in a new roof and they did new siding to get it ready for sales. So the assessed value, a year old, or up to 30 months old, doesn't reflect what it sold for because they did all this work in the interim. You can't compare a subset to the whole. You can compare one to the whole and ask why there's a delta.
I'd like to respond to Selectman Trask. I wasn't talking about sales. I was talking about tax bills.
But you just mentioned sales several times.
I mentioned sales because I didn't mention it several times. I mentioned it once. And that was, I asked for what those properties sold for. I've moved beyond that. And I'm focusing on what the tax bill is. Because that's the thing that snaps everybody's money.
Andrew, do you have any other specific questions?
Yes, I do.
Can we let Steve go through with his
Yes, I
rest of
do.
his presentation?
I do, the last one.
Thank you.
Residential property improvements and expansions, permits are taken out from the building inspector's office. Once these permits are completed, inspected, and filed with the assessor's office on their field cards, because the field card in the inspector's office is more detailed than what you can pull out on the computer. All right, so you have a permit, maybe you put in a swimming pool, maybe you put on a porch, maybe you put on a dormer on a home, and the permit is taken from the inspector's office. The permits are completed, inspected, and filed with the assessor's office. How long does it take for the assessor's office to update the total assessed valuation on that residential property? And vice versa. If field items are taken down, such as sheds or pools or things like that, and the assessor's department is notified, how long does it take to have these items removed from their total assessed valuation? That's my question.
Steve, is there an answer for that?
I guess like anything, it depends. And like, I guess I'll use this year, for example. You're familiar with new growth?
Yes, I am.
So new growth, the state allows us to collect new growth for fiscal year 21 up to the start of the fiscal year. So basically up to June 30th of 2020. right before fiscal year '21 starts. If there was a permit taken out in the prior summer, let's say a year ago, to build a pool, and we monthly extract all the permits that are filed, and we upload them, we enter them into our assessors database, and then we follow them through to completion. So if that pool was done on July 1st of 2020, that's the first day of the fiscal year, we legally can't pick that up and reflect it on FY '21 property values. So now you're going to be 2 years, really 2.5 years, once the values are certified, removed from when that permit was first pulled. So it depends. You could have a quick one. You could have one pulled in beginning of June. We upload it. They're removing a shed. The shed's gone the next day. We take it off. It's done. It could be 2 days. It could be, I mean, in some cases you have houses that are being built 3-4 years, and we're still following them. But whatever it is, every year we go out and we mark them. If they're not done at the end of the year, we do a percentage of completion. We go out next year in June and we look what's going on. Still not done, percentage of completion, it goes out another year. So it's just a huge variation.
Do you remember a conversation that we recently had?
Andrew, he answered the question.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Through the chair, may I ask make a statement? We had a conversation maybe about 6 months ago about a piece of property that made major improvements on it, major, double the size of the property. 5 years later, it hadn't hit the tax rolls, and I asked why. So that's my question.
It's an individual situation that
Right.
probably there's not a response
I,
to.
this is a very complex problem. I know it.
And I appreciate you bringing it to our attention, and I'm sure the manager and the assessor hear the question. And perhaps they can, between them, come up with,
A little bit more attention to the detail and the outcome. I think that was my mission here, not to cause any problems.
no, I understand, but I think that question is valid, and I'm sure they heard it, and we'll look at it, correct?
And I'm sure that people that are listening at home are probably going to be watching for their new tax bill, and I'm urging them to file an abatement if they see that there's something amiss. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, sir. You have to go to the microphone and introduce yourself, identify yourself. People may not recognize you with a mask.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Duggan, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. I'll try to be brief. It's just a follow-up question to Mrs. Daly's presentation. So I may have missed this during the initial presentation. I believe there's two types of appraisals. There's a mass appraisal and a fee appraisal. The fee appraisal is for specific events such as a purchase and sale, a refinance, or an estate valuation. And then the other one is the mass valuation, where you do many properties at the same time. Are those basically just the two different types through you, Mr. Chair?
Not aware of any other types. Is there another type, Steve?
I'm not aware.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, so I think this may have been, and I don't want to speak for Mrs. Daly, but when we do these mass appraisals, what are the attributes that are used, or are there the classification codes that are used for that process? And what is the granularity? It seems, if you do, I know you do many properties. I don't know how many properties are done at any given time, but I would be interested in knowing the accuracy. Are some of these valuations, are there samples taken and then checked for real-world accuracy?
I can't answer that, but the state use code has a number of classes, and as the chart showed, 48% of our properties are single families.
Right.
and then it's broken down to condominiums, two-family, three-family, accessory land with improvements, 4 to 8 units, developable land, undevelopable land, childcare facilities. So there's many categories.
Right, I
And
understand.
they're all looked at individually.
But there's differentiations in single-family homes, locations, the year that they were built, the size. of
And I
the
think he
property.
explained the year that's built is depreciated
Yeah,
until such time as they improve it.
Okay. And just one last question on that. Is that like software, commercial software that's used for that process, or is that something that's developed in-house?
I'm sure it's up to
Patriot
date.
Property is commercial.
Okay, all right, that's fine. So I'm all set with that. And then just one other question involving Proposition 2.5. So sometimes I hear people say, my property tax went up more than 2.5, but that's not relevant. So your property tax could go up and down as a single property. It doesn't involve 2.5. 2.5 involves the maximum tax levy, the tax levy ceiling.
Plus last year's new growth.
Yeah, plus the new growth. So that's how much for the next fiscal year you can generate revenue from taxation. Do we know what that number is? Is that like the magic number that we strive to hit? Or we just hope for the best and we don't want to get near that number? It seems like maybe the number's picked, the 2.5 number is picked the ceiling, and then we try to hit that, right? So we can change, I don't know if we're doing that tonight with the numbers, we can kind of tweak them and,
I'll ask the town manager to respond to that.
So first of all, ceiling and limit are two very different things. Your ceiling is statutorily set, and it is significantly higher than your limit. So your tax levy limit is last year's levy plus 2.5%, along with the growth number that's certified. It's not a magic number that we back into. Generally speaking, as folks watching know, Danvers has never voted to approve a budget override. So for the past 35 years, the town has operated within Prop 2.5. Most years we're near our levy limit for a couple of reasons. One is the approach for decades here has been to be conservative with some of the non-levy revenues so that we have sufficient free cash at the end of a year to pay for the next year's capital equipment, because in order to provide minimum services without raising your levy beyond the limit, you have very limited options. And so the financial practice in Danvers for decades has been to aim to generate free cash so that you can replace your sander and your police cruisers the following year. Otherwise, you either have to bond for it or you have to do a debt exclusion at a town meeting to do things like that. So we know each year generally, and I've been here, I think this is 6 years now, we were near the levy limit when I got here, and we've been near the levy limit every year, and it's just a function of how the budget is put together each year. And those decisions are made in the spring. And what we're talking about tonight is not adjusting that levy, it's determining how the costs within that levy are shared. So it's you made a point that I think a lot of people get stuck on is your tax bill is a function of both the budget that was passed and the change in relative value of your home within the universe of homes. So some homes are appreciating, and as we'll see soon, at a faster rate, some are not. And so there is a subtle shift within each class before we talk about commercial versus residential.
okay, that's good. I know that topic came up when we were trying to figure out how we were gonna finance the Smith School. We knew we were near that limit.
Matt, to the chair, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. So that's something I think that we always keep in mind. I think that no one in town really wants to do the override or the exclusion, so just something to keep in mind. All right, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Steve, want to continue? And please, Steve, recognize your staff that's here tonight.
Oh, good. David Simon is here. Assistant Assessor Bruce Sims is a member of the Board of Assessors.
Thank you.
All right, so this is really the start of the classification hearing. The purpose of a public classification hearing for the select board is to determine the allocation of local property taxes formed by the four classes. That's residential, industrial, personal property, commercial, for the fiscal year 2021. So, this is the one most of the discussion surrounds your board's going to adopt a factor, either set a minimum residential factor or commercial industrial shift to determine what percentage of the tax levy will be borne across those classes. In addition to that, you're going to select to grant to deny an open space discount, to deny a residential exemption, grant to deny a small commercial exemption, or can also vote to grant the authority to the Board of Assessors Chairman to sign on behalf of the Select Board on the DOR gateway, reflecting the votes that take place tonight. So jumping right into 2021 valuation distribution is it's about a quarter commercial, 3/4 residential. That remains pretty steady year after year. This one goes into a little bit of history of that. You can see the fluctuations in the peak for the real estate crash back in 2007. Got the valley there. Obviously, we've climbed up above that. And just to note that the commercial industrial base has remained steady, but it doesn't have the volatility that the residential base has due to the residential increasing at such a rapid or decreasing at such a rapid rate. You can see how, if you look at the residential percentage, the CIP percentage, you can see the large fluctuations. This is overall assessed valuation change by with each property type. So we got generally this year was relatively flat. The residential went up a little over 1% as a whole. The commercial industrial went down a little bit. Those are just from one-off adjustments. The class as a whole, as far as market adjustments, was flat this year. Total industrial was also relatively flat. The 5.9% is actually largely made up of Aviomed as they continue to build through their stages. And then personal property, as you know, is just a replacement of business property, and it would be the delta between the two. You got a depreciated asset that's removed, and an undepreciated asset that's brought on because it's brand new. And you have the difference between that, so that makes sense. Overall, the tax base increased by 1.2%. And then we kind of drilled down a little bit. This slide is different from last year. We drilled down a little bit into the different types of property within the residential class, from single-family condominiums, 2 and 3 families, and apartment buildings. Those are defined as 4 units or more. And then on the right, we have the assessed value chain differences. You can see, about 1.3%, about the same as the whole class. That's single families make up a large percentage of this. Condos, a couple percent. 2 and 3 families actually down a couple percent. Part of that is we had 8 parcels removed going to either condos or single families, and then in the apartments, about 1.5% or so. And here is this is new growth in both valuation and tax dollars. This was a decent year. There's $969,000 in tax dollars, so largely attributable to really two things. One, all the single-family subdevelopments that are going on, and also the data quality study. We're able to pick up some work that hadn't been prior reflected, whether it was done without a permit or for whatever reason, and we were able to capture that as new growth this year. And then this is, town manager was talking about, this is the, your tax levy. So you get your prior year, it's basically just simple calculation. Prior year levy limit, you got plus 2.5% right on top of that, and then plus new growth, and that gives you the levy limit. And then you just subtract what the actual levy or the actual amounts that need to be raised by tax money, and that gives you your excess capacity. And you can see the changes year over year from 20 to 21. And the other part is we'll be looking at voting on a minimum residential factor. This would be the commercial industrial shift. Here's the historic family tax bills. We have in the percent change. You can see year to year, this, it goes up and down depending on what the market's doing. And this is the historic average valuation comparison. So this is average valuation, not average tax bill, comparing the single family, 2, 3 families, and condominium average. You can see that everybody doesn't rise and fall at the same rate. Interestingly enough, that if you do the 2010 to 2021 change, so the 10 to 21, the 12-year change, all 3 of these properties are really within a few percentage points for total change. It's just they kind of got there at different rates. And this is a slide we added this year. Look at it was requested from the board last year. They'd like to look at average tax bill and some other data points from comparable communities. So we're looking at the single family tax bill, average family and then the amount of parcels within that class. Through some towns that deemed to be comparable to Danvers. And this is, as we get into the CIP shifts and distribution of tax levy, I put this chart together to kind of show that historically Danvers has tried to fall in the 2/3, 1/3 approach where the commercial, industrial, and personal property pick up about 1/3 of the tax board, and the residential picks up the other 2/3, and then the historic result of the CIP shift that was voted on to get to that point. And here's the comparison from our comparable communities, the same communities, and the single family comparison with what they do with their CIP shift and the allocation of the tax levy amongst the classes. And as a point of reference, I added the bottom graph is the percentage of total value. So like Danvers is 23%, Burlington's 38%, but then if you go to the bar graph directly above that, you can see in Danvers, the commercial, even though it only makes up 23%, it actually picks up 32% of the tax levy. In Burlington, you can see that the commercial industrial actually picks up an amazing 62% of that tax levy. And then at the top one, so I think what everyone was interested in last year is what are they shifting to? The Danvers is definitely in the lower half at the 1.4, and with a few communities exceeding the 1.5 shift. So and that's something to kind of put on your radar this year. If there's some questions around it, how do you exceed a 150% shift? So Chapter 200 was an amendment that was put through, and it basically says that once you go to 1.5, the only way you can exceed 1.5 is if it results in a lower factor, a lower percentage of the levy than the residential base has ever picked up in history since you started classifying property. So the data bank says the lowest they have on record is 60.1%. So you would have to be, a shift to 1.5 would mean that they would have to pick up at least the 60%, and then you can exceed it if it resulted in lower than that. shift, what's the percentage of levy picked up by the residences? You know, if it's greater than 1, you stop. You have to stay at 1.5. That's the situation Danvers is in this year. 1.5 is the maximum allowable shift. If it's not, you can continue down through the sheet. And here is the selection of residential factor. You guys have the booklet with all the shifts and the percentages from 1 to 1.5. This is just a snapshot for illustration. I'm sure everyone has gone through their sheet. And then, I don't know, do you want to have, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Do you want to have discussion around that now, or do you want me to finish through?
Why don't you finish through, and then we'll come back and take them one at a time.
Okay. Now, this open space discount is a discount that allows, it's a shift within the residential class that allows you to grant a discount to property that would otherwise be developable and doesn't fit into things like land chapter 61, 61A. It's used relatively sparingly in Massachusetts, and anecdotally, what has been found to happen is that it doesn't really prevent the land from being developed. There's no teeth or payback clause when the land is developed. It's just a situation where people will take the reduction in taxes, and it's much more advantageous to be in a chapter 60 or 61. Danvers does not have any property currently classified as open space, so a discount would not apply to any properties currently in Danvers. The residential exemption is actually a shift within the residential class. What it's doing is it's generally used in the cities, directly around Boston. That, I know Chelsea, for example, it's something like 80% of their residential homes are non-owner occupied, so they're rentals. So what they do is with Danvers, it's the reverse. You probably got 5%, so what it is, it's a discount in the taxes that if you're a resident and owner occupied, you get the discount. And if you don't live there and you have it as an income property, you pick up the tax burden that was shifted off the person who lives in town. It's also used down on the Cape where a majority of the homes are rental homes and things like that. Small commercial exemption. This is an exemption of up to 10% of the property value for commercial properties only. And then you can't have more than 10 employees, cannot exceed $1 million. The problem with this is it's been found that generally the business who occupies the space, this is at all times, this isn't true 100% of the time, but a lot of times they're leasing the space, and the landowner gets to develop the benefit and doesn't necessarily pass it down to the small business you're trying to help. And that is all for tonight as far as classification. I'll go back to the board's action items.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. So, selection of a minimum residential factor. Bill?
Excuse me?
Any thoughts on the factor?
No. No, I'm going to withhold my, I think that in the past we've worked out well with the 1/3, 2/3. And if we can continue to do that, I'll be happy with that. I've got a figure I've written down here, but I'm not going to divulge it at this time until we see how other people compare with that.
Gardner?
Sure. So, this being my 15th year doing this, I think I almost have the pattern down. There is no right answer here. There is no absolute, there's no correct thing to do. There is our best effort. Most communities have a classification of 1. Business pays the same rate that towns pay. Business pays the same rate the residentials pay. But we've shifted away from that. We have, fortunately, a healthy mix of business and residential in the town. Towns like Hamilton and Wenham, they don't, because they don't have enough business to offset the tax burden on the residents by changing our classification. If we were, and I don't think at this point, that horse has left the barn years ago. We wouldn't go back. If we tried to apply a flat rate, we would increase the residents by over $1,100 and decrease businesses by over $8,800. We're not going to go in that direction. Historically, we've gone through ebbs and flows, and we've tried to take into account the fact that the market is cyclical. Sometimes the residential market's on the upswing, sometimes, and we also know that it takes sometimes up to 30 months for assessments to catch up to that. I know from past practice and past discussions, a third of the properties in town get evaluated each year. We have a 36-month rotation, and everybody gets assessed at least once every 3 years. And if I'm on the tail end of that 3 years, my house assessment may not accurately reflect a market rate in the current year. So we have several philosophies. We could leave it at the current rate of 1.40. Some will say, well, why change anything? We're at 1.40 this year. In fiscal year 20, why not stay that in 21, fiscal year 21? And the effect is $233 more for the residents and $955 more for the business. Condos fall just slightly below what residents have. Or we could stay, some people said, stay at the 1306 we're at. So last year, 1.4 equated to $13.06 per thousand. We could stay there. But then you really overburden the business, because your residential tax rate would only go up $68, but each business, the average, would go over $2,700. So we're trying to be equitable. Businesses aren't nameless entities in this town. We talked about this last meeting. Of 37 businesses in town that have a liquor license, 30 of them are small, local owned. They're in-town owned, they're not chains. So, yeah, we could look at Endicott Street, we could look at, 114 and say, oh, look at all those big boxes, look at all those chains. That's not the large majority of businesses in town. They're usually small businesses. So we perpetuate this. We should ask the businesses to pay more. Well, no one can adequately explain why, but we've gone that route, including the 1/3, 2/3 scenario. The fact is that businesses make up 23% of the total value of the town. Yet we charge them 33.3% when we do the 1/3, 2/3 breakdown. Again, there's no specific reasoning why we should ask a business to pony up, but again, that's the horse has left the barn. So I've looked at the different scenarios, whether we go with no factor, just a factor of 1, that's off the table. We have yet, and Mr. Duggan asked earlier, we have yet to tax to the max, which is go to a classification of 1.5. And even if we did, your taxes would still go up. Minute amounts, but the taxes for a business, the average business would go up over $3,400 while yours only went up $3.60. So you try to find something in the middle. So I land on one of two. One is the 66-33 split, where residents will go 118 and commercial will go up 2,211. Or my preference is, especially in this economy, especially in COVID times, everyone should pay the same. The tide should rise all the boats equally. So percentage-wise, meaning how much you're affected as a percentage, I'm recommending, and we'll make a motion if I'm able, that we go to 1.407 which means a residential increase of $218 and a commercial increase of $1,132, in which case both are going to rise, excuse me, the 3.4%, 3.9, 3.39, 3.4%. So both the increase for the residents this year will be 3.39, the increase for the business will be 3.39 of their respective values, and that number equates to 1.407, as opposed to a disparate increase when you go 1/3, 2/3.
Repeat that number, Gardner.
1.407 reflects a rise of 3.4% for each, the residential category and for the commercial industrial category.
If I'm reading the right line, that's $218.26 increase for a single family?
Correct. And for commercial industrial, it's $1,132.37.
37 or 27?
1132.37. That means as the values of both have gone up, an increase, the tide has risen, both boats rise the same amount. If you do a 1/3, 2/3, it's slightly different, and now we're just shaving dollars, a couple of dollars here or there. And I don't think this is a time to further burden businesses. I don't mind equally, I'm gonna say this, I don't mind maintaining the current disparity. I don't want to make the current disparity worse between businesses and for businesses.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
David?
Was that a motion that Gardner made?
No, I
No,
made
you have to hear from 3 other people.
Okay. What Gardner says makes sense to me. There is no easy answer. It's like whether there should be in-school learning or remote learning. There is no easy answer. This is my 7th year, I believe, of taking part of this classification. What troubles me is that there is no rule of law, and it is a matter totally of discretion. And inasmuch as what Gardner has suggested is essentially following the pattern for the last 7 years as I have noticed it, I am comfortable staying there, although I will always be nervous that there is no rule, and it is mostly a matter of discretion. And discretion means the right to be able to be wrong, but it's still not a comfortable thing for any of us, I don't think, to make. And paying taxes is probably, my taxes went up $3,700 this year because my in-law apartment is considered a 2-family. It is horrendous. And when I go to meet with my age group tomorrow, or the next day, they're going to scream because many of them are in condominiums, and they're just terrified at where the taxes are going. So I don't think there's an easy answer. What Gardner has suggested feels appropriate to me, given the fact that we are acting as a matter of discretion. Thank you.
Thank you. Maureen?
Thank you. This is all new to me, too. Very interesting. I like Bill, I want to hear what everybody has to say. Nobody wants to pay taxes, increases for taxes, but we want to keep residents here. We want to keep businesses here. We want to try to attract more, it looks like more commercial, industrial, if we can, businesses. I'd like to hear what other people have to say. I'm liking what Gardner is saying. It's too bad we even have to increase any taxes. I mean, with COVID, I know everybody keeps on hearing this. Do we have to set this tonight, right, Dan?
We do, we're actually late.
We're late, right? We have to
This
set
is,
it tonight, 'cause it was
yes.
supposed to be in November?
Rodney needs this information so we can
Okay.
go to the state. So, Gardner, I'm right on with you with that number.
Okay.
I had that number or the next page over, either one, the 1.4080, but I like the 14070, giving single-family homeowners an average increase, I say average, $218, and businesses $1,132 and change. And it's equitable as you can be in an unequitable situation. So, Bill,
Since you two are so close, I'm fine with that number.
good.
Is that, Dan, can I ask, has that been like, what was last year's increase?
Last year was a bigger increase.
Was it big, right?
Yeah, because last year the average value went up 5.7,
Right.
and this year it's only 1.7, the overall, so,
I like what Gardner has to say too. I mean, we have to split it. We shouldn't have to put it all on the residents. We want businesses to stay here because ultimately, you know, we're all one, right? So we want to keep it as fair as we can,
yep.
not burden people as much. Nobody likes the increases, but
And to the condo owners, your tax bill will only go up an average $191.
I'm good with that.
Okay, so, Gardner?
Mr. Chairman, if I may make a motion that we adopt a residential factor of 1.407.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Judge Mills left the room, but he was in favor, so, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
And for the homeowner, your new tax rate is $13.36 per thousand. Is that correct, Steve?
Yeah, just preface that with, it could move a penny
Could move a penny or
in
two.
either direction,
but
depending
nothing-
on rounding.
Okay,
And for comparison, this year's rate is 1306.
right.
So it went up 30 cents per thousand,
And if you look at, yeah,
which
if you,
averages to 218.
if you look at other communities too, you know, with Steve's charts, I mean, Dan, you see it all the time. You know, I think Raleigh's like 1558 per thousand or something, so.
All right, so the next action is number 2, the selection of an open space discount. Is there a motion? Maureen, you want to make a
it?
motion?
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I'll make a motion, selection of an open space discount.
no selection.
No selection,
That's your motion.
yes.
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. The granting of a residential exemption.
I'll make a motion, no granting of a residential exemption.
Is there a second?
Second to that?
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Granting of a small commercial exemption.
I'll make the motion, no granting of a small commercial exemption.
Second motion?
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And the last one is a vote to grant authority to the Board of Assessors Chairman to sign on behalf of the Select Board on the DOR Gateway. Steve, would you explain that?
Yeah, it's the, called the LA 5 options table, so it's basically, it just reflects your vote tonight, so it'll be, so we had to enter it as a minimum residential factor. If you look on your sheet here, it's a 1.407. If you go all the way to the left, you'll see the res factors. It'll be entered what the 1.407 CIP shift equals as a residential exemption, residential factor. And then I will put that in, and then I will say no open discount, no residential exemption, no small commercial exemption. And then I will click a electronic signature box. And then the clerk will authorize the votes that took place tonight as part of the process. So
Thank
it's
you.
just me basically speaking on your behalf by filling out that form.
Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move we grant authority to the Board of Assessors Chairman to sign on behalf of the Select Board on the DOR Gateway.
Second. Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, none. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rodney.
That's what we voted. Tell you,
Yes, thank you. David, when you went out, we took the votes, I'm sorry, but you were in favor of the 1.40? Yes, so
Thank you, Dan.
that was a yes? Thank you.
Thank you.
And all the others, I assume you concur?
with the other, these other motions, yeah.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Okay. Mr. Manager, you have some interesting items for us?
That remains to be seen. I do have some items. The first is probably not very interesting. It's the calendar that the board voted on at the last meeting, reflecting a couple of small changes, notably the August meeting being moved from the 3rd to the 17th. So Ann put this together. Feel free to take a look at it an hour later, and if you see anything on there that conflicts or that we want to circle back and look at, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll get these populated on the town website fairly soon. This will be our tentative meeting schedule for 2021. I'll mention two things briefly before I get to the item that you received in your packets. First, the budget policy that the board voted on at the last meeting has been distributed to both the school committee and the library trustees with the idea that they understand that 12/15 is the date that we're looking at, meaning our next meeting, to finalize that. So I'll report back at our next meeting if they have any comments or feedback. And on Friday the 5th, in this very room, we will be having our first welcoming committee working group meeting. So we have 15 of the 16 members are available at that time. And I was on a call this morning with the person who wasn't going to be able to make that meeting, and I'll be circling back with them afterward. But this will be the first of a series of those meetings. These are private meetings and a chance for this group to get into some of the issues that we talked about throughout the fall relating to the flag controversy and the reactions and the feelings surrounding that discussion. So I'm looking forward to that. The committee members I spoke with this morning are looking forward to that as well. So that'll start this week. And then just briefly, you did receive in your packets a memorandum from Ann Freitas in my office. At the last select board meeting, Chairman Bennett mentioned that he had been approached by Dick Moody regarding the naming of a bridge in Danversport, and the question was raised in terms of what the process is to do that. The short answer is there isn't a perfect process for naming something like that. What this memorandum talks about is a policy that was adopted back in 1997 for the naming of items, nothing like a town-owned building or a bridge per se, but the placement of a stone with a name on it, a memorial field, for example, something like that. So there's a process by which the Recreation Committee was asked to weigh in on requests to name things. And while that's appropriate for a ball field, it's not an appropriate process for a town building or a bridge or things of that nature, but it does lay out a decent process for us to consider. And the last time this came up, of course, Ms. Daly just left, but she had approached this board last year about her idea to rename the senior center after former town manager Wayne Marquis. And the board wasn't comfortable taking any action without a public process. This happened just before COVID started, so I don't believe anything has happened on that front. But the process that the board discussed, which is mentioned at the end here, would be, when we're talking about something like the senior center, we have the Danvers Council on Aging that oversees, supports what happens in that senior center. So the idea then was to have a public hearing of sorts. We were going to work with Ms. Daly to advertise and find some space to have the public come and share their thoughts. Certainly go to the committee or the board that is most closely aligned with the asset. In that case, it was the senior center. And then to report back to this board, letting this board know where, in that case, where would the Council on Aging fall with a request like this? What sort of feedback was received from the community? This board does have the authority to grant those requests. And I think if this is something that the board wanted to pursue, if we're talking about a bridge in Danversport, the river committee might be one option as a place to start to have a discussion. Certainly, the Veterans Council would probably weigh in on this because the request from Dick Moody was to name the bridge after Danvers residents who were veterans of foreign war. So if you've had a chance to read the memo, I'd be happy to take any feedback on it or answer any questions you may have. Think about the process moving forward.
Thank you, Steve. So my thought is that we should have some kind of semi-formal process for when somebody has something they want to make put a name to. Depending on the structure, we should have somebody, a department that's related to that. Certainly, the recreation director for recreation areas, ball fields, would be appropriate. But in the case of a bridge or a building, we should have some other staff members and/or committee work to vet the recommendation or the ask. And we should develop some criteria, not strict criteria, but some type of loose criteria that we can all look at is this appropriate? And I think if you reach out to the Veterans Council, they have a set criteria that they use to nominate somebody. So there may be some information there that we can adopt and maybe expand on that. Then have that committee make a recommendation and bring it to us after perhaps a public hearing before it comes to us. Staff, you could pick the staff, the committee to work with them and let that process work its way out. But if we have a general outline of what the process is, an application, and I certainly don't want to wait 4 months from receipt of an application to start the process, which
And I
is
think
mentioned.
I will also reach out to colleagues to find out what sort of processes exist elsewhere. This is local government. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. If there are good processes in place that we can adopt and adapt for our own purposes. So we'll reach out as well.
Yeah, that's great. If we can adapt something that's in writing, and then when these things come up, we can reach to that and say, here's the steps. I'd like to be able to hear from Mr. Moody, Colonel Moody, before Memorial Day.
I think at one of the next, I would say probably I would say probably one of our January meetings, I can prepare a draft for the board to take a look at. That we
Okay,
can then-
great. Any other comments from fellow board members? Agreeable?
Sounds good. Nice, sounds good.
Okay, great.
Dan.
Thank you. What else, Steve?
That's all that I had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There is no consent calendar, so we'll move right on to new business, old business. I'd like to turn to our representative liaison to the River Committee. Do you have an update?
So our meeting last Tuesday, or Wednesday, I can't remember which, we did present, we elected a new chairman of the River Committee. It's Dan DiLorenzo, in place of Eileen Labby, who was our long-serving chairperson. He opened the meeting with a discussion on the subject that was raised at the Selectmen's meeting, and we are going to be looking at that internally. Mrs. Daly was present and offered some thoughts and comments at that meeting as well. This is a complex issue, as you heard earlier, involving not only the state, but also Concom, the River Committee, building, and others. And we are primarily waiting on to see our grant application for surveys. If that is fruitful, then we will look to starting the survey process at the organization of the River Committee and the town administration. If we are unsuccessful, we will look into the potential use of some of the slip fees that have been collected, or look for a funding source. We did vote to look for a funding source if the grant application was not approved. It will not be a swift, next month we'll have a resolution, but we did take that up, and it is first and foremost on our charge right now.
So you're referring to public ways? The right-of-ways, are you referring to?
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes, we were referring to the public ways. I thought that's what the primary subject you were
Right, but
asking about.
you didn't mention it, so I just want to make sure.
I'm
that
sorry,
that's-
yes. There is one specific one that is being addressed
I'm
forthright,
thinking
but
all of them.
others will be addressed as well.
At the same time?
At the same time, with different levels of prioritization, as it were.
Sure.
We did remind the board that 2 years ago, Selectman Langlois and I initiated this effort with Aaron Henry and Chris Sanborn and Rich Maloney. And the grant application was the fruit of that effort. Sometimes, as we all know, government is a slow-moving ship. And, but it is not forgotten, and we will be addressing it, and I can we will not have a meeting before our next selectmen's meeting, so I won't have an update, more of an update unless I talk internally to members of the staff.
And perhaps once you get something in the motion, we can ask the new chairperson to come before us and give this board an update on their progress
Sure.
at some point in time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gardner, do you have any other new business?
I do not. Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate the accommodation while I was remote of allowing me to participate.
New business, David?
Nothing, thank you. I apologize for being late because I thought the meeting was at 7, obviously.
Thank you. Maureen, new business?
I'm on the Rail Trail Committee, and they seem to be really doing a great job, always doing improvements, always looking for volunteers to help. I was fortunate to be on this school committee, and had a tour of that school. That was fabulous.
The building committee?
The building committee, yeah.
Great.
I can't believe it. My youngest son went there, and we had no walls. Now, it's amazing. So the group's doing great. Jen was there, and Dave Lane, and a bunch of other people. They did a great job. And it's really, we should be proud to live in this town, to have such another great elementary school. And let's see, Danvers Housing, I joined with them on a committee too, and Cindy Dunn does a fabulous job, taking care of our seniors. And, I really appreciate all the work that she does with the committee. And, hope everybody had a nice Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill?
I got no new business, except that I did have 3 conversations with 3 different people who have liquor licenses in town, and they were very appreciative of our vote from the last meeting.
Good, great, thank you.
Dan,
Yes,
I'm sorry. May I speak one? I forgot something.
oh, go ahead.
You're from the Committee on Inclusion, Human Rights and Inclusion. With the leadership of Donna Hopkins, who's one of the members, the committee funded the publication of yard signs, and there is a couple on the fence in front of my house, and they're scattered little by little around town. There is another huge box of them available. If anybody wants one, call me, come to my house, or be in touch with Donna. It's kind of a shame that they haven't gotten around because of COVID restrictions. It's kind of hard to go and knock on doors and otherwise. In any event, the signs are available. We think, the committee, of course, it's their project, our project, and we think it's great. So we hope that more people will display the signs in their yards. Thank you.
Very good, thank you, David. Closing comments? Bill?
I have none, thank you.
Maureen?
Thank you. No, none.
Gardner?
I'm all set, thank you.
David?
I would like to just say that every single day I watch the job that our town administration, Steve as a leader, and all of the people who are so well led and committed to this town, I think have done a phenomenal job, including the school committee and the school department. I can't imagine being a parent at this time, or a teacher, or an administrator, to try to keep everybody happy. The absolutely impossible task, but I just think that our town people are doing a great job, and I watch it every day.
Thank you. As far as our next meetings, Mr. Manager, I'd like you to kind of update me after you get an update on the COVID situation in town before we set our next agenda. If that's all right with the group, we may meet virtually. I know some hospitals are in flux right now with what they're doing. I wanted this meeting to be public. I don't think we need to be public the next meeting.
Not necessarily. We have the public hearing tentatively slated for the traffic rule and order. That advertisement.
We can adopt that on a first reading and let the public weigh
Yep.
in. So,
And then the financial summit could certainly be done remotely. There's no public hearing for that, and we could issue invitations to any of the other boards. We might actually get a good turnout.
better turn out that way. So,
And I think at this point, we remain in the yellow. Our positive rate is still in the 3s, as is the Commonwealth in average. I think this week's report will be telling because As everybody knows, there was a lot of concern heading into the holiday weekend that we were going to see a surge in positive cases. And so we're monitoring, we're taking calls on a daily basis through public health. But the state does its weekly update on Thursdays, and then we update our town website on Friday. So this Thursday, we will know a lot more in terms of.
There's a nursing home in town that's gone from 3 to 11 employees with COVID, so, and they've had to spread some of their residents out to other facilities, so let's keep an eye on what's going on. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a
Yes.
question about the next meeting if we don't go public. I was, in my conversations with the people who had liquor licenses, one of them is in the process of expanding their operation, or wants to expand their operation within the building that they own, and they were told they had to wait, they couldn't come before our meeting tonight to get that approval. And it seemed that we had a pretty light schedule. This is about a week and a half ago. I was talking to the person who was the manager of the business. He's very concerned that they want to be able to get this approval from us to expand their business within the building they already own, to be able to function with the limitations of space and spacing of people, which they can accommodate in their building because they own the whole building. And I just want to make sure that they get before us,
Well,
or
if
have
they
a way
go
to do
through the
that.
clerk's office, fill out the application.
They
You can
wanted to
speak
do
to
that,
that?
but they were told they couldn't do it for this meeting.
Kathy has something to say.
That particular location requires advertising by the ABCC. So the application came in, and we have scheduled that to come before the board on the 15th, with the advertisement requirement. So they couldn't come tonight because of that requirement.
But you're going to have the advertising done before the next meeting?
The advertisement was in the newspaper, I think it's scheduled to be in the newspaper on December 3rd for the meeting on the 15th.
Okay, so they'll be able to be accommodated at our next meeting.
We can, if it's a virtual, there are ways to accommodate, yep, if we need. And I think we can also circle back, we can have David Fields or somebody reach out. You know, we have some flexibility right now. It sounds to me like that isn't going to apply here, but Bill, we can circle back with the property owner to make
So
sure.
David Fields is the person that they want to contact with?
No,
is
not
that-
necessarily. What I'm suggesting, it sounds like Kathy already has the information, so
Yeah.
we can circle back and make sure that, as we have been, we'll respond in a timely manner and make sure that we work with them to get what they need.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
The
thank you.
application's in process.
All right, so remember the veterans, please. And if there's no other business to come before the board, the meeting is adjourned. Good night, Danvers.